All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep into a case that you won't soon forget. Imagine a picture-perfect, postcard-worthy village in the Italian Alps.
Cogne.
Cogne, exactly.
Yeah.
Snow is falling, pristine, peaceful, beautiful. But this tranquil setting became the backdrop for a crime that shook Italy and really the world.
Hmm.
On January 30th, 2002, a 3-year-old boy named Annamaria Franzoni was found murdered in his bed. Just a horrific scene.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Suspicion naturally fell on those closest to him, his parents, Annamaria and Stefano. From the outside, they seem like an ordinary family, but as we know, appearances can be deceiving.
Absolutely.
So to get to the bottom of this, we've got police reports, court transcripts, and even some psychological analyses of Annamaria.
Interesting.
Our goal today is to sift through all of this, try to understand the key arguments, and explore the lingering questions that I think continue to surround this case.
Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Really makes you think.
Let's start by setting the scene. The Franzonis lived in this idyllic village, seemingly a normal, loving family. But the police quickly became suspicious of Annamaria. That morning, she called emergency services frantic, claiming that an intruder had broken in and attacked Samuel.
You might think, okay, a mother finds her child murdered. Of course she's going to be distraught. But investigators noticed some red flags right away.
Like the fact that there was no sign of forced entry, right?
Exactly, yeah.
No broken windows, no doors pried open.
Right.
If an intruder didn't break in, how did they get into the house?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Adding to the mystery was Annamaria's demeanor. Some reports describe her as being oddly calm, almost detached. But couldn't that just be shock? I mean, trauma affects people differently, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We can't judge someone's guilt based on how they react in a crisis. Grief can manifest in countless ways. Some people scream and cry, others shut down completely. It's not a reliable indicator of anything other than the fact that they're going through something unimaginably horrific.
So the police were in a tough spot. They had a murdered child, a distraught mother, and no clear signs of an intruder. So what did they do next?
They did what investigators do. They started digging.
Yeah.
They questioned neighbors, searched the surrounding area for any sign of someone suspicious, but they came up empty-handed. No witnesses, no suspicious individuals lurking about.
And this is where things take an interesting turn. With no clear evidence pointing to an intruder, the investigation turned inward, focusing on the Franzoni home itself.
And what they found inside added another layer of complexity to the case. The likely murder weapon, a kitchen knife from the Franzoni house.
Okay, so that definitely raises the stakes. A murder weapon from the house itself makes it harder to maintain that intruder theory. But what about fingerprints or DNA? Could that have cleared Annamaria?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated for Annamaria. Aside from the families, there were no other fingerprints or DNA found at the scene. This essentially narrows the circle of suspects considerably, placing Annamaria firmly in the spotlight.
So she's gone from grieving mother to prime suspect in a matter of days. This is where the case really starts to heat up, right?
Absolutely. And as the police dug deeper into Annamaria's life, they discovered a history of psychological challenges, specifically anxiety and depression.
Now hold on a second. Millions of people struggle with anxiety and depression. That doesn't automatically make them murderers, does it? Wouldn't that be a dangerous assumption for the police to make?
That's a great point, and it raises an important question about bias in investigations. Let's say you just bought a red car.
Yeah.
Suddenly you start noticing red cars everywhere. Are there really more red cars? Or is your brain just focusing on them now?
I see what you mean. It's like once the police suspected Annamaria, they might have started seeing everything through that lens, interpreting everything as evidence against her.
That's exactly what we call confirmation bias.
Yeah.
It's a natural human tendency, but in a murder investigation, it can have serious consequences.
So we've got this perfect storm brewing. A shocking crime, a lack of clear evidence pointing to an intruder, and a mother with a history of psychological issues. It's no wonder this case became a media sensation.
Oh, absolutely. This case had everything. A tragic victim, a beautiful setting turned sinister, and a suspect who was both sympathetic and potentially dangerous. It was tailor-made for headlines.
It's almost like the case became bigger than the actual events. Did all the media attention affect the investigation or the trial itself?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely added a layer of pressure. Imagine being a juror in this case. You're not just weighing evidence, you're also dealing with the weight of public opinion, the constant media scrutiny. It must have been incredibly difficult to remain objective.
Okay, so let's talk about the trial. With suspicion mounting, the case goes to court. This is where things get really interesting, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. What was the prosecution's main theory?
Their case hinged on the idea that Annamaria, perhaps overwhelmed by stress or struggling with her mental health, just snapped. They pointed to the lack of forced entry, the murder weapon coming from the house, and inconsistencies in her statements as evidence of her guilt.
But wouldn't the defense have argued that those were all circumstantial? I mean, no one actually saw Anna Maria harm Samuel. Couldn't those inconsistencies be chalked up to shock and trauma?
Exactly. The defense argued vehemently that the police had tunnel vision, fixating on Annamaria early on and ignoring other possibilities. They insisted that the lack of evidence for an intruder didn't automatically mean one didn't exist.
So it's a classic he said, she said situation. What kind of evidence did each side present to support their claims?
Well, the prosecution focused heavily on the physical evidence, the lack of forced entry, the murder weapon being a kitchen knife from the house. Those are hard to explain away. They also highlighted Annamaria's changing story, inconsistencies in her timeline of events. They argued that these inconsistencies pointed to a guilty mind trying to cover its tracks.
What about the defense? What was their strategy?
The defense really hammered home the idea of reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
They argued that the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. No one saw Annamaria commit the crime, and the physical evidence, while suggestive, wasn't conclusive proof of her guilt. They also brought in expert witnesses to testify about the unreliability of eyewitness testimony and the effects of trauma on memory.
So we have a compelling case from the prosecution based on physical evidence and a defense focused on highlighting the lack of direct proof. What did the jury decide?
After a long and highly publicized trial, the jury found Annamaria Franzoni guilty of the murder of her son in 2008. She was sentenced to 16 years in prison.
Wow, 16 years. That's a significant sentence. It sounds like the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution's theory that Anna Maria was responsible. What was the public reaction?
Italy was completely divided. Some people felt justice had been served, that a dangerous woman had been held accountable for a horrific crime. Others believed a terrible miscarriage of justice had occurred, that a grieving mother had been wrongly convicted. The debate raged on in the media and in homes across the country.
This case really gripped the nation, didn't it? But the story doesn't end there, right? There was a development a few years later that added another layer of complexity to this already intricate case.
You're right. In a twist that surprised many, Annamaria's sentence was reduced to 9 years and 7 months in 2012.
That's a pretty significant reduction. What was the reasoning behind that?
This is where the Italian legal system and its focus on premeditation comes into play. To put it simply, the court decided that while Annamaria was guilty, there was insufficient evidence to prove she had planned the murder in advance.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar with the Italian legal system, can you break that down a bit? What does premeditation mean in this context, and why is it so important?
Sure. In Italy, the distinction between a premeditated murder and one committed in the heat of the moment is crucial. Premeditation implies a level of planning, of cold-blooded intention. If a crime is deemed premeditated, the punishment is usually much harsher. In Annamaria's case, the court concluded that while she did kill her son, it wasn't a planned act. It was something that happened impulsively in a moment of crisis.
So that changes things quite a bit, doesn't it? It suggests that Anna Maria didn't wake up that morning intending to kill Samuel.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a woman who, for whatever reason, lost control and acted in a way that had devastating consequences. This distinction isn't just a legal technicality. It fundamentally changes how we understand Annamaria's actions and her culpability.
So we have a verdict, but it's not a simple open and shut case. A mother is convicted of killing her child, but the court acknowledges that it wasn't a premeditated act. Where does that leave us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We're left with this unsettling sense of ambiguity. We know Annamaria was responsible for Samuel's death, but the why remains elusive. What triggered such a violent act from a woman who, by many accounts, loved her son deeply?
It's like we're missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. We have the events, the evidence, but the motive, the true understanding of what happened that day is still shrouded in mystery.
And that's what makes this case so compelling, yet so frustrating. It defies easy answers, leaving us with more questions than we started with.
It really makes you think about the limits of what we can know, even with all the evidence and expert opinions. But this isn't just some abstract legal puzzle. There's a real human tragedy at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. We can't forget that a child lost his life, a family was shattered, and even with the court's decision, there's no real sense of closure. The why hangs over everything.
Yeah, I keep coming back to Anna Maria's psychological history. The court decided the murder wasn't premeditated, but could her mental health struggles have played a role in what happened that day?
It's tempting to draw a straight line between her past struggles and this horrific act. But mental health is complex. It's rarely the sole explanation for behavior, especially something as extreme as this.
So we're left with this unsettling gray area. We may never fully understand what went through Anna Maria's mind on that tragic day. Does this case tell us anything about the limitations of our justice system?
It definitely highlights the challenges of dealing with cases where mental health is a factor. How do you weigh someone's psychological state when determining guilt and punishment? It's a question that courts grapple with all the time, and there are no easy answers.
And in this case, it feels like the ambiguity is amplified by the media frenzy surrounding it. Do you think the intense public scrutiny influenced the outcome in any way?
It's impossible to say for certain, but it's worth considering. When a case captures the public imagination like this one did, it creates immense pressure on everyone involved, the investigators, the lawyers, the jury. It's hard to escape the feeling that they weren't just deciding Anna Maria's fate, but responding to the court of public opinion as well.
It makes you wonder, if you were on that jury, faced with all the evidence, the conflicting arguments, the media circus surrounding the case, what would your verdict have been? What would it take for you to feel certain, one way or the other?
That's a question we should all ask ourselves when we delve into cases like this. How do we reconcile the need for justice with the understanding that we may never have all the pieces of the puzzle? It's a humbling reminder of the limitations of our legal system and the complexities of human behavior.
We started this deep dive wanting to understand the Cogne case, but I think what we've really uncovered is something much more profound. This isn't just about a crime, it's about our capacity for both love and violence, the challenges of interpreting evidence, and the constant struggle to find truth in a world where things are rarely black and white.
And it's a reminder that sometimes the most important questions are the ones we can't definitively answer. The questions that linger long after the verdict is read, forcing us to confront the messy realities of the human experience.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Cogne murder, I'm left with a sense of unease, but also a profound respect for the complexity of the human psyche.
And for the tireless efforts of those who seek justice, knowing that sometimes the most elusive truth is the one that lies within ourselves.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the many layers of this case and what it reveals about our own perceptions and biases. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into more cases like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like the video if you found the story compelling, and share it with your friends and family who might be interested in true crime and mysteries. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our latest content and join a growing community of curious minds exploring the most fascinating cases. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything.